What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So, an odd decision, kind of once again, for Mario Maker 2. There's a ton of preview coverage that went out, and I have to say, it sounds like Mario Maker. Sounds like we're gonna have a lot of fun playing it. But an odd decision when it comes to a control scheme for a handheld mode that we're gonna talk today. It's gonna be something you want to at least be aware of, because then you can technically get a few things ahead of time to make sure you're ready for day one. And then also we gotta talk about EA, because they keep making themselves look really bad over this whole loot box thing, and they just made themselves look flat out ridiculous when talking to UK government officials. As always, guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure to like button, it does help out, and get subscribed as we head through with E3 all done. Still a ton of coverage coming out and all kinds of news still breaking as we go over the summer with a ton of games coming out. We're actually gonna start today with an odd one. Alpha Protocol. Do you remember this game? I actually remember playing it back on the 360 and thought it was okay. There were some gameplay elements that I think could have been better, but it was still pretty fun. Well, for some reason, it's been removed from Steam, like completely. And what's interesting about this is they actually left a little note behind, as you're seeing here, that says it's actually from the publisher's request. So it's no longer available to purchase because the publisher does not want it there anymore. Now, Obsidian seemed to really like this game. They, of course, developed it, and Sega worked to publish it. And while it wasn't hailed as like the greatest game ever or anything, I think there is still a following for it, and this could possibly mean a few things. I mean, the best case scenario is that they're working on some kind of remaster or remake. The worst case scenario is there's some kind of licensing issue and they had to pull it down. I'd like to think that there's some sort of remaster coming out and it's going to be announced, because it's an odd thing to see it just ripped down from Steam otherwise. We also have 4 new games going to Game Pass starting tomorrow for a few of them, and then some games leaving. One of them's it makes me kind of sad to see it go, because I think there are people who still haven't tried it out, so I'm gonna let you know about it so you can try it out before it leaves. But 4 of the games that are showing up include, for today, Resident Evil Revelations, and then Rare Replay, and then next week you'll see Torment Tides, and then you'll see Goat Simulator. So seeing Rare Replay there is pretty awesome, right? That's actually really cool to see that show up. However, several games will be leaving. Next up, Hero, Dead Island Definitive Edition, Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition, Shadow Complex Remastered, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and then Zombie Army Trilogy. Next up, Hero is leaving June 27th, while all the other ones are leaving June 30th. Shadow Complex is the game I would say you should try out, although, to be fair, I've been kind of on a Metroidvania kick recently, but it's a very good game if you haven't tried it out. However, seeing Rare Replay get kind of thrown in there means that actually a ton of games are technically getting thrown into Game Pass right through the work of Rare Replay. So if you haven't checked that one out, that's going to be really cool to see that pop up, and you can check it out apparently starting today. Also, Hellblade got an update now on the Switch, and it fixes something I pointed out in my video that was a bit disappointing, which was the home icon. I don't usually care too much about home icons, but this one kind of stuck out to me as much as the all lowercase text does for Resident Evil 4. But if you remember, the original one was basically just a light blue symbol. Didn't really look like Hellblade. Sure, there was like a symbol that most people have played it know about, but now that they've changed it to this symbol that you're seeing here, it seems much better, I think, for representation of the game on your home screen. They also, outside of updating the home screen icon, fixed audio sync, increased the font size of subtitles in docked and handheld modes, and they have various optimizations and improvements as well, which, hey, maybe Digital Foundry will have to go back and take a look to see what they have improved, because we have seen several games technically improve over time, with Wolfenstein 2 being one that saw actually a fairly dramatic increase in resolution and performance on the Switch. Oh, and I've been having a blast with Bloodstained. However, there is a bit of an issue right now, and you may have already run into it, but they can't seem to figure out how to fix it, and it's to the point now where most of us who played at least halfway through the game or so got stuck. 1.02 came out, the patch. It was fairly large. It was like 3 gigabytes. I installed it, and then I realized I couldn't get past a certain part midway through the game where I needed to get an item out of a chest, because after installing the update, the chests were all open and you couldn't seem to get anything out of them. So I was left without a way to get any way past this part of the game. So if you've already been playing it and you have not installed the patch, you want to install the patch immediately, or you're gonna have to start over, and others are saying you can delete it and reinstall it. I have it digitally, so I can't unfortunately do that. But yes, it's a shame to see this break what's been a very good game so far, but I'm gonna have to go back and restart it. I'll probably just wait for the Switch version at this point coming next week because I'm going to get it physically to help support, again, this game further, and I'll just pick it up from there. And guys, some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. We're going to start with Super Mario Maker 2 right away. It's out next week. Very excited to check it out. I don't like building levels, but I definitely like playing them. I've messed around with the level editor here and there on the Wii U, and I thought it was okay, but I'm just not into the building stuff. That's just not something I like, but I love playing people's levels, whether it's the ones where it runs you through automatically and just kind of stand there and it does all kinds of cool stuff or plays music, or the very difficult ones that you play over and over and over again until you finally get lucky and beat it. But what's odd about the situation around Mario Maker 2 on the Switch is a lot of preview coverage has come out, and it seems you can't actually use button presses when in handheld mode when actually building levels. Do you remember how we saw them technically doing that in like docked mode and everything? And it seemed to be rolling along fine. It's like, okay, I'm gonna use obviously buttons because I don't have a touchscreen in front of me, which sure, the touchscreen's probably the best option as we saw with the Wii U, but the Switch doesn't technically come with a stylus, so that's kind of weird. You gotta use your finger and everything, and it could be less precise than using like a stylus. So when you remove it from the dock, you actually lose the ability to press any of the buttons when you're editing your level and instead are forced to touchscreen use. Now what's interesting about this is it seems to happen when the Joy-Con controllers are attached to the sides. As in tabletop mode, it also seems to work with button presses. So it's basically as soon as you remove any of the controllers from the sides of the Switch, it stops acting that way. It's kind of an odd thing to hear about from Kotaku. I'm going to have to see this one for myself because it seems very, very weird for them not to include an option to just use buttons if you want. Maybe you don't want to swipe your finger all over the screen and everything, and that's why I'm actually recommending that you get a stylus ahead of time. I mean, they're not expensive. You can usually find one on Amazon for like 10 bucks prime shipped most time. I'll even throw a link in the description for one that I was checking out. As long as your specific stylus will work on pretty much any capacitive screen, it should work fine on the Switch. Not necessarily like an Air Pen or something. It has to be just a specific one. They have like the rubber tips on them, like the nubs that work to kind of replicate your finger when gliding across the screen. Weird decision by Nintendo. I don't know if they would ever patch it in, as I don't think Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee ever got a patch to use Pro controllers, even though I'd rather use that, right, for the Switch rather than use either the Pokeball Plus or a single Joy-Con. But this is a bit of a bigger game, and it's all in-house for Nintendo rather than, of course, being with Game Freak and Pokemon Company, so maybe they could put that in there. We're gonna see how it all works out. I do still think the touchscreen is the best way to build a level when in handheld mode, but it already works in docked mode, it works in tabletop mode. Why can't it just work the same in handheld mode as an option, right? Touchscreen or button presses. Next up, EA decided to go and meet for over 3 hours, it seemed. It was a lot with UK government officials, and they sent Kerry Hopkins, who seems to represent them as VP of Government Affairs and Legal and everything, and they had some just wild quotes. You may have seen them online, but some of them it was some of the craziest spin I've ever seen a company do. I honestly was reading it. I was a bit shocked at some of this stuff because they essentially went there and they answered a lot of questions as the UK government is looking into the gambling mechanics around things like loot boxes, which have become a problem for some people who have addictive natures because, well, the companies build these things around those addictive natures to get you to continue buying into something that doesn't, I guess, necessarily exist as a limited amount in front of you, as that seems to be one of the biggest, I guess, arguments around something like trading cards. Is there was a lot of stuff stopping you from actually going and getting more and more and more of them, whereas it's like an unlimited supply with something like digital supply is the way it's been explained. It's a whole, I mean, it's a very, very messy situation trying to figure all this out, navigate something that's still relatively new to government when it comes to loot boxes. However, it doesn't seem that they don't use the term loot box anymore. They can't use it. In fact, when it was called loot boxes, they said, whoa, who's saying about loot? We don't call them loot boxes. We call them surprise mechanics, and they're very ethical. That's surprise mechanics. So they've essentially taken the loot box and renamed it to, I guess, make it seem less threatening or sound less like loot box is basically what's happened. It is a wild thing to see because if you remember, there were a lot of rumors about Disney not being happy with gambling being attached to Star Wars because EA was doing everything they could with loot boxes and it didn't go over well. So they decided to change the name of it to Surprise Mechanics, hey, surprise. And they seem to, according to them, think that it makes the player very happy to have these in things like FIFA, despite you having to redo it every time when FIFA comes out. It's an annualized series. It's not an ongoing games as a service, technically. It's a yearly games as a service. None of your stuff seems to carry over. And they do specifically talk about FIFA quite a bit. They go over all kinds of stuff, but it was a little odd. Some of it didn't really match up to me. Like, they could seem to see where people were spending the most time in a game. They had like a full heat map, but they couldn't track player time in FIFA. Like, some of this stuff didn't make sense to me, but the biggest headline was them calling loot boxes surprise mechanics in a bid to try to have it make sense to lawmakers and say, hey guys, it's not like a slot machine, it's not gambling, they're surprise mechanics like those Kinder eggs. Next up, let's talk about Luigi's Mansion 3 and apparently a little bit of Metroid Prime 4, as that seemed to kind of take over the news when it came to this article and this interview done by Eurogamer. It was pretty cool to see this. They talked quite a bit to developers, producers from Luigi's Mansion 3, specifically about how they've kind of evolved the series, because there were a few things that could have used work from Luigi's Mansion. I think a lot of people would admit that. It seems like the boss battles is like the biggest thing that they were working on, because they, I guess, thought they could do better with them and make them more interesting. And to a degree, I could agree with that, yes. It also sounds like all the additional moves that we saw in the preview and the different things in the treehouse are kind of built around some of those bosses and the atmosphere that you're playing in. We also hear that you'll be able to explore most of the hotel as kind of like a hub world, like an open world kind of thing, right? Where you're kind of walking around. It's not linear necessarily after you get to a certain point. And then further down the interview, of course, they had to ask Mr. Tanabe, what's going on with Metroid Prime 4? And he just said, hey, look, we're focusing on Luigi's Mansion 3, and they'll talk about Metroid Prime 4 when they're ready. And that actually kind of blew up online, although, I mean, I feel like that was assumed. They'll talk about a game when it's ready to be shown. And here's the thing about Metroid Prime 4. They're not going to talk about that thing until it's less than a year out, I think. I think they're pretty much ready to put that on the back burner. Let it stew a bit, cook, get ready. And then when it's like 8 months out, that's when we'll probably see it. I think they learned their lesson to show us too much too soon. I mean, that was way too soon. I say too much, even though it was like, a very short clip and like a JPEG and everything, but it was too much. We didn't necessarily need to know about Metroid Prime 4, and it turned into a bit of a mess because we know it's restarted. We know they're looking for art directors. We know at this point, it might be one of the last games on the Switch, so it's going to be a while, as they've already told us, and this is how somehow a full interview for Luigi's Mansion 3 turned into Metroid Prime 4. I do wonder if it's just going to become a mild Mother 3 situation where they're asked about it every E3 until it's shown, because it could be 2, possibly 3 E3s until we see Metroid Prime 4 again. And our last bit of news, let's talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake, because it's coming out March 3rd. Super excited, even though it sounds like it's going to be the very beginning of the game, right? When they're fleeing Midgar, apparently is where it's going to end. So I'll be curious to see how they come up with 2 Blu-rays worth of content for that area, and it seems like we had a bit more explanation on how they're going to make that happen, because it's not just going to follow the main story. It's also going to do all kinds of extra things, like side missions, new enemies, a ton of new dialogue. This was actually in a full interview and a full section in Famitsu where it was heavily talked about, and we also found out that the section, there are some controversial parts about Final Fantasy VII. One of them is a section where Cloud has to dress up as a girl to kind of trick and get his way into a certain inn. And it looks like that's actually going to stay in the game. So that's good to hear, because that was one of the controversial scenes that people were concerned about being ripped out of the game. There's also talk about an ethics division that apparently worked with them to make sure Tifa had on an extra shirt. Although I think Tifa looks fine in the game, much more modern, right, than in the 90s and everything. And I think character model works out much better for what she's trying to accomplish with kind of the hand-to-hand combat and everything. So far what I'm hearing sounds good from a lot of this stuff. New items, new weapons. They're talking about all kinds of extra stuff being added to it. I just want to see how they're going to stretch out that 5-6 hours worth of content from the original and make it that large to where they say it's like a full-fledged Final Fantasy. I'm more curious about it feeling stretched out and that it just goes on too long, but we'll see. And we'll finish up today with the comment of the day from yesterday. This one's from Anton saying, Breath of the Wild gameplay plus traditional Zelda story and dungeons equals perfection. I hope it will be that way. So I've thought more and more about the Breath of the Wild sequel, Breath of the Wild 2, and how they are going to make it feel different from the first Breath of the Wild, similar to how Majora's Mask feels different from Ocarina of Time, despite using pretty much all the same assets and everything, right? But Majora's Mask feels different, seems different, plays different even. So I'm wondering if they're going to get rid of a lot of the shrines even, and rather than just make it like a straight up one-to-one with gameplay and the scenarios and everything, do they take a shot at traditional Zelda dungeons and Breath of the Wild 2? They might. I mean, that's very possible that they let Breath of the Wild, the original one, kind of keep its big open world, 4 or 5 main dungeons, I guess, technically, a ton of shrines, and then in the second one, they kind of go more along the lines of the ideas they had with a story that they were trying to add in through DLC, and it's more traditional dungeons. You get a weapon in the dungeon that helps you beat the boss, and then you can open up other parts of the world. I would actually be okay with that. I would prefer that even, because I think Breath of the Wild can stand on its own as its own game, so let Breath of the Wild 2 do the same. Ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit the like button, really helps out. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about, whether it is Super Mario Maker 2 having just touch controls in handheld mode, specifically when the Joy-Cons are attached. Is that a deal breaker for you? Does that bother you? I think most people are gonna, get over it and get Mario Maker 2 and play it either way, but I feel like they should add it. Let me know if you think that's the case as well. And then what do you think about EA talking with government officials and calling loot boxes surprise mechanics, because everyone loves them and they're great. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.